Illinois faces some big challenges. Today, we're about to hear a truly honest analysis of the problems we face. Equally as important, you'll also hear an in-depth discussion of some practical solutions. This is your radio source for stories, the insight, and the answers you won't hear anywhere else. Not in the media and not coming from Springfield. You're listening to Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Now, here's your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft, and on this edition of Illinois Rising, pleased to be joined by John Tillman, President and CEO of the Illinois Policy Institute. And John, a big week for defeating a bad policy that returned like a bad penny. That's the constitutional amendment that was proposed by State Representative Lou Lang, D. Skokie, when he's not focused on putting a slot machine on every street corner. He's proposing to graduate the state income tax, and that's what he proposed again. Tried to amend it to control rates because of the concern about rate creep that was expressed even by some Democrats. But that still wasn't enough. Your guy, Lucci, Mike Lucci from the Illinois Policy Institute, had a good analysis of this that he actually...
he always does.
Well, he does, and he actually just had some help, unusually, from the Illinois Department of Revenue, which did a fiscal note on this proposal from State Representative Lou Lang to graduate the state income tax. Would have cost 20,000 private sector jobs over the first 4 years after its implementation, with an additional net loss of 43,000 Illinoisans leaving the state and almost $2 billion in gross domestic product loss. So even some Democrats apparently got the message that this would be, which would have horrific consequences, and so the proposal died in the House.
And thank God it did. And one of the reasons it died in the House is because of a very good leadership on the Republican side who held together, and one of the best spokesmen on this subject is our guest, Representative Joe Sosnowski.
State Representative Joe Sosnowski, Republican from Rockford and DeKalb. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Hey, no problem. Thanks for having me.
So kind of describe what happened this week in Springfield, where it was touch and go for a bit about the prospects for this move to graduate the state income tax, but that was ultimately defeated.
Yeah, fortunately, it didn't move forward. You know, of course, it goes in with a long line of proposals. As you know, they had a separate millionaires tax, the progressive tax, both of which would have increased taxes by billions of dollars. And then we were also carefully monitoring a school funding constitutional amendment, which would have added $6 billion to the tax roll. But, what we saw, I think, was the inability for them to get the number of votes that they needed in the House to move the progressive tax forward. There was even a handful of Democrats who were very leery of it. So,
stop the presses.
We were able to stop that.
Joe, that is fascinating, and I think none of those Democrats don't come into play without discipline on your side of the aisle. So congratulations to you, Leader Durkin, and everybody who held firm, because I know the pressure was immense. Because, Illinois has shown such great stewardship of the tax dollars already provided by the taxpayers, and given the great track record, we should probably give them more. This would have made Illinois have the highest small business tax in the country. I think that's one of the important things. And the other thing that did come out in terms of the rate structure discussion is this was just a starting point. They've made it very clear they would like these rates to go up and go up quickly once they had control of the checkbook. So talk a little bit about what you're hearing from your constituents, business owners, people who are worried about the future of Illinois. Did you get much feedback? Have you talked to people in your community?
Oh, yeah, we get tons of feedback and a lot of concern. And like what you said, Representative Lang, who had the structure proposed, they were trying to sell this as a discount for the vast majority of Americans by lowering the lowest tax rate. Of course, if you saw the way they structured it, you knew that they wanted to bump that up immediately to over 5%. And not only do they want to raise the rates, but they would also lower the income threshold, similar to what we've seen in other states like California. So local businesses, my area, homeowners, families, everybody was extremely concerned about this, because eventually, even maybe not in year one, but in year 2 and 3, they would look to make that so that it would affect everybody. And like you said, there's no shortage of money that they could waste in Illinois government, and the more they get, the more they waste. And it's just obviously readily apparent from the last income tax increase that brought in tens of billions of dollars, and really with no reforms, no spending cuts, they spent all of it, and we're right back in the same point that we were prior to the income tax increase. So it's
The interesting thing about the income tax and the history in Illinois, right? This has not always been with us. It hasn't been here since 1818. It's only been here since 1970. The infinite wisdom of Republicans and Democrats coming together. Republican Governor Dick Ogilvie and
another bad example of bipartisanship.
Correct, and and Mayor Daley, who actually ran the convention, was Mike Madigan's coming out party, so to speak, it was a bad idea to institute a state income tax, which is what the 1970 convention provided. But it was interesting that they at least agreed on a flat tax, because what they knew was that it was going to be hard to raise the state income tax if it was a flat tax rather than a graduated tax where you could just manipulate some of the brackets to the exclusion of the others. If you want to raise that flat tax, then you got to raise it on everybody, and that means everybody shares a proportional hit. And so it's been more difficult to do that, despite the alleged temporary play of Pat Quinn and the Democrats back in 2011. And the good news is that Rauner is intent, one of his key campaign promises was to get that state income tax back to 3% where it was prior to Quinn by the end of his first term. And he's going to push for the sunsetting to continue and for Democrats to have to come to the table on spending, which is really what we're talking about, to what you were saying, Joe, about the impact of the 2011 tax increase and all the money that was spent to leave us in the same place 5 years later.
Yeah, and you've got to have the reforms in spending. We're giving out too much money in our social service programs without accountability. Obviously, we all know there's too much money going out in pensions, and even the common sense constitutional reforms that the governor has proposed that could save $500 million or more a year. They've really put up a roadblock to it, Madigan and the unions, and they refuse to compromise with the governor on any of this. And it's common sense stuff, things that we've needed to do for years, that finally we've got an executive in there who's, dictating those things and saying, here's ideas, here's problems that exist, here's solutions, and we need to work on these. And as of right now, everybody's the lemmings are going along with Madigan's leadership, and they refuse to break from the pack. And it's really unfortunate for the residents of Illinois right now.
Well, here's one of the interesting things. The other side argues that it's more fair to have people who earn more money pay a discriminatory rate that's higher. But the truth is, there's roughly 6 million tax returns are filed in the state of Illinois. There's 217,000 people who file a tax return making $250,000 or more. Those very small slice of the taxpayers pay 33% of all the income taxes. So I would say that people that are at the upper income brackets are doing far more than their share right now.
Well, that's the thing. Whether you're for or against the current income tax, and I don't discount the fact that we probably would be better off with more of a user-based tax system. But we've got it at the three quarters right now. It's fair for everybody. It's an equal percentage. It doesn't punish those folks who do well. It doesn't punish those who aren't doing well. And as you kind of alluded to, there's a lot of discounts and ways to get around it for lower income families and individuals that really a large share of Illinois folks aren't paying any income tax at all. And so we're helping those in need as it is right now. So the need for an increase or progressive model to punish those and scare them away, as we've seen in other states, their millionaires are mobile. They'll take companies or corporate headquarters or their personal residence, and they'll go to other states.
As 3,000 millionaires did last year, fleeing Chicago. State Representative Joe Sosnowski, Republican from Rockford. Joe, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys. You have a great weekend.
You too. And I wanted to pick up what just on this whole issue of the tax, because, John, one of the other things that was bandied about this week is the idea that there may be some grand bargain afoot that would include an increase in the state income tax in exchange for some of the structural reforms that Governor Rauner has proposed. What's your sense of what's happening in Springfield?
I've talked to people in Springfield at a fairly high level, and I think that the grand bargain on a big tax hike is not going to happen. I think the governor is still set that he would not consider any revenue increases and only modest ones. unless he gets material, substantial reforms in collective bargaining for local governments, which would be a huge relief to what's driving property taxes at the local level, and also workers' comp reform, which would change the entire competitive landscape of the state of Illinois. He has said all along he would only consider that revenues if he got those things among a few others. And it doesn't look like that bargain is yet coming together, but I don't think there's any truth to the idea there's going to be some massive tax hike as part of a grand bargain. I think he's still opposed to that.
And as we said on this show before, absent structural reform, rethinking how state government works and the costs it imposes, every day we don't have a budget is a day we don't have a tax increase.
That's exactly right. This is one of the great myths, by the way. I'm glad you mentioned that. It's one of my favorite lines as well. Is every day of a budget impasse is a day of victory for the taxpayers. And the reason is because 90% of the spending is already happening. It's mandated by court decrees and consent decrees and all the rest of it. So we're going to actually spend near record levels this year despite the budget impasse. So this brouhaha and all this craziness in the media and by advocates that somehow there's a crisis of spending is just not true. That does not mean there isn't problems for some people, but we're spending at a record rate.